for the Gathering Podcast.
There's not just a pool of people you could hire and a pool of people who work for you. There are so many different formats of talented people that you need to keep in your orbit. And that includes your investors, your peer mentors, your advisors, your customers. Companies are often just so reactive. We needed this person 6 months ago. We tried to find them. We didn't do it well, or like we haven't.
Right.
We hired the wrong person.
Indeed.com.
Yeah, right. And now it's urgent. You want to hire a CMO that has 10 years experience, that understands X, Y, and Z, just knock on their door. You don't even need the intro. Go find them and tell them, I don't want to hire you. I want to hear your story. I want your advice. Just reach out to folks. If you're on the job hunt and thinking about what you're doing next, there's nothing that other people like more than talking about themselves.
It's becoming more difficult than ever to hire talent here in Canada, specifically for executives who may be retiring out of the workforce or otherwise are looking for a little bit more career experience before they want to take on positions of leadership. Today, we sit down with Marianne Bulger for this episode of the Gathering Podcast to learn more about her recommendations for companies who are looking for executive talent and how they can pre-prepare to hire for that role.
Listen to the people. Listen to the people. People and culture. Oh yeah. It's time for the Gathering Podcast. It's time for the Gathering Podcast.
Welcome back to the studio, Marianne.
Thank you.
It's awesome to have you here. Years later,
Right?
Yeah. When do you think was the last time that you came by?
I think it was during the pandemic. Come to think of it.
6 feet away?
Yeah,
Few
we were
years.
on opposite sides. No
Yeah.
one else was here.
Right.
You were right, as you were describing it before. It's been several years. I think at that time I was trying to wrangle all of the unemployed folks in our Canadian tech community with Prospect and the help list. And you and I spent some time talking a little bit more about that.
And that was before, absolutely, before the studio had video capabilities.
Yes.
So before Startwell Studios was founded, definitely at least 2-3 years.
So we were just wearing sweatsuits, loungewear.
And masks?
No. I
No, we
don't
took
think
them
so.
off.
Yeah.
And of course, this was before the man to my right, Martin Hawk, was
Hello.
joining us for this series, the
Yeah, I am.
Gathering series.
The Gathering Podcast.
There you go, the Gathering Podcast.
Yeah. That's a lot has changed.
So I want to dig into how, because we didn't even say this downstairs or before we started rolling, but how do you guys know each other?
Marianne is this amazing human being that just fell down out of nowhere and said, hey, you've really got something here, when I was working on the People group.
Oh.
So I don't actually recall. We went for lunch at Gusto.
Yes.
That's the first. I remember the place, so that means I would have been working at CoinSquare, which means we were in the 2017 to 2019 range. Nobody cares how I do the math, but that's where it is.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the impetus or the origin story there, but that lunch you gave me a boost of much needed confidence to say there's something here, there's something special. You should treat it as such, as opposed to this laissez-faire thing on the side. And since then, you've been instrumental in making awesome introductions to people that are building communities and recommendations, and just very grateful for it. And I figured it would be fun to catch up and chat and go from there. Yeah.
Well, I still have just as much conviction, if not more, for the group. I think it's really important that we sometimes ask founders to step aside and put some of the amazing people behind the scenes who are building companies on stage in the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
And often that comes with building the peer communities that they need in order to get better faster at what they do. And the only way we get better faster is by learning from each other. Obviously, Google exists, but we all know that that's a lonely, dark place.
Oh, yeah.
Being able to really put the beacon out there and crowdsource ideas and opinions from folks that are ahead of you in their career, even behind you in their careers. And there was no place for people.
Good one. Yeah.
How many years in, though, was the People group when you guys met up? couple of years, right? 2, 3?
Yeah, well, it's where we just hit 7 in 2018. What's that? I don't know math.
It was brand new. I
Yeah,
think you were
1, 2.
a year old
Yeah,
at that time.
yeah. We wouldn't have been 1,000 members at that time, I don't think.
How many members are there now?
5,000.
5,000.
Yeah,
And how many of them are active?
about 1,500.
That's insane.
So
When
for
you
all
actually-
of the lurkers out there listening and watching this,
I'm watching you.
get online more.
I guess.
I mean, that's an like unprecedented percentage of a community, especially a Slack community, to have that many people engaged, continually engaged in the content. So
It's true. Big,
people are giving people by nature, and that was the like stroke of luck part. I could have started a community for chefs, and by nature of the circumstances, they probably don't use Slack very much. But
I don't know, man. I am a big believer in this, like the potentiality of online community development and niche support. And I think far too often, and I think this is something that you might have connected with Martin's early story with the people group, is that fundamentally, if profit maximization from day one and a business model is attached to community development, often cases the early community doesn't have that conviction to be together.
yeah,
You can come afterwards, like you can add a business model once you know your community and you understand the value that you can offer them as the platform for their interaction. But I've been seeing since the birth of the commercial internet, right? Like and the open web, various attempts. In the beginning, it was even like, in a sense, GeoCities, right? It was a web hosting platform that had like urban topography attached to its navigation structure. But like there's always been these different efforts people have made to kind of create community online and do that as a commercial enterprise. And it's interesting. Every time I see a kind of a new version of that thing, I realize, or I'm reminded that it comes down to the kernel. And the kernel is about the community, not the infrastructure for gathering, not the place is only a place because of the people that have
100%.
attachment to it.
yeah, and in those early days, it's cheesy and sometimes overlooked, this comment, but it has to be by and for, not just for. Like you can't just come up with this idea that you're going to produce this product for these people. The only way it actually gains momentum is if they build it themselves. You just have to create the container. That may apply to every single product.
Yeah.
I think out there, product-led growth is obviously very trendy right now, but part of that is just listening to your customers and what they want and continuing to deliver on those features and those changes, not just the vision you have in your head.
Can you break that down for me? Because I've been hearing this phrase a lot, and I see it as a kind of a misnomer, but I'm not sure I understand. What is product-led growth?
Okay, I'm not an expert at this, so I'll try my best to explain it. But I think that a lot of what we've seen over the past decade with venture-backed tech companies is growth at all costs, which obviously over the past few years has changed quite a bit with access to money being
It's like
minimal.
It's not growth if it's just spending.
But I also think that there was a huge belief that if you pumped more and more money into something, it would continue to grow. And this was also, a huge reason why the direct-to-consumer space had such a boon in the 2010s, in the mid-2010s, because I think with the loose laws around advertising on social media platforms and the ability for performance marketing to be more predictable, it meant you could just pump cash into your business and see the results in sales. And I think in that change, my understanding is in that change, it's forced brands to be far more conscious about the things that they're actually doing in order to influence consumers, which is great. Product-led growth is more about being adaptable to exactly what your customers want, not using money. It's not the money talks mentality.
Yeah.
It's a question of what happens if we listen to them and adapt to them and change and mold and move on that premise.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us could agree with that. I also think that there are sometimes limitations, but that's my understanding.
It's funny because these distinctions, I might be dyslexic, but when I came, when I moved to Montreal for university in 1998, and I came back to Canada, I'm Canadian, but I lived in Nairobi for a number of years. And I got very familiar with the informal sector in Nairobi, and I participated in it when the internet came in. I was an installer. I was an internet installer, right? So at high
way.
school, I walked around with a bag of modems, and I would teach
Bag of
people.
modems.
Yeah, literally. And I would teach people what the internet was and convince them to sign up. I was the internet salesman, like the first internet salesman in East Africa. And and there's lots to that story. But I then came here and I realized there's a lot of structure in North America in terms of how people break reality down and human society down. They always put that in frame everything by these relativistic structures. And in marketing, as I learn more about the industry of marketing, right, and we're uncovering some of this stuff on our podcast in the last the main Start Well podcast in the last few episodes, is speaking with marketers and revenue people and salespeople about methodologies and case studies and helping our audience learn a little bit about the to-dos and how things work, because everyone's got their kind of playbook, assuming that there's standards, but there's no standards of things. And then the platforms are supposed to be delivering products that are usable, but they're subjectively usable in the sense of everyone has different performance metrics that they can measure success by, because they're not just buying something simple. Like, I'll give you some money, you put the ad in the newspaper, and then people read your newspaper, we win. That's great. It's gotten more complicated, right? So I bring all this up because in Africa, for example, and I'm speaking on behalf of a continent, I'll say in Kenya, where I lived, like this idea of product-led growth, everything is product-led growth. Man, when I lived in Kenya, the whole economy, what it was supported by? Donor money. There was no, the economy of Kenya was in 80% in 1992 when we moved there, supported by donor money.
Like aid dollars.
Foreign
It's a huge
aid.
problem.
But that
Yeah.
has been inverted now, right? And Kenya is a net exporter.
Yeah.
And it's got a thriving economy, and it's gone multi-sector, and there's everything going on there. But the point I'm making is that it feels like a very North American thing to assume, when I meet entrepreneurs that assume that finance as a business input is something that is third-party sourced and necessary. So people will not, I keep meeting these entrepreneurs, people calling themselves entrepreneurs, who won't undertake a venture unless they have tons of money and would never put anything of their own into that venture. I'm like, no, you're an employee at that point.
Yeah.
You're making me think about something I experimented with recently and it failed miserably, which was my husband has decided to start a contracting business.
Okay.
He quit his day job last year. This was inevitable. If you know my husband, Jeff, you know that he was meant to be building homes, and he just finally came to terms with it. And we decided this spring, let's do a mailer campaign. If you really want to build homes in your neighborhood, we should just put a note in every single person's mailbox. And we sent notes to 2,000 mailboxes, and we got no response.
No response.
Zero.
Yeah.
But do we have any regrets? No. You have to take some of these risks sometimes to try the things that are outside of the box, spend your own money, invest in it, see what happens, turn around, keep walking, keep moving.
And that anecdote has lots of lessons in it, right? So on one hand, there's conventional approaches that should be nice, clean approaches.
I thought, yeah.
and they fail.
Get one lead at least.
It still might happen. But
True. Yeah.
Oh, I've experimented with postal campaigns for Start Well. Because I had this positive, right? Especially it was the density in the neighborhood, and people, poor guys, they walk by us every day, but they don't know what we are, so we can message them, and then multiple points of contact. We'll hit them up digitally on different social media. We'll give them something in their mail. We'll give them coupons. Man, we sent people free money. Here's free money.
Just
and
lying
they
there.
threw it in the recycling bin, or they never looked at it. They never got it. This all happens in condo buildings. People don't look at their mail at all because people think that, the only mail I get is asking for something, and I get
Of course.
and so if there's nothing essential in their mail, and mail isn't a coveted thing, like it's not like I love mail. If someone sends me something in the mail, like a real thing, it's so exciting to me. I open up that letter, I'm like, what? But how often do people do that anymore?
Yeah, I
You
think
know, like-
you're unique in that aspect.
No, if I sent you a handwritten note and drew you a picture or something,
Yeah, no.
you'd be like, wow, he drew me a picture.
There's the answer. We just need to start a company. Scrap everything. We
Yeah.
just hire people to write actual letters.
Yeah.
We can chat GPT the message or whatever.
But
Then, they have handwriting robots. I know about that, but like you can sniff that out.
Yeah. Canada Post, right?
Yeah.
Like way back used to do this. So even now, if your kid sends a letter to Santa Claus at Christmas and puts it in the mail, it'll come back with a response. And that's handled by Canada Post. And it used to be handwritten people labor way back.
Yeah.
And now it's just like, it's a standard kind of response, like as far as I know. But try it out at Christmas.
Okay.
Let's see.
Interesting.
Speaking of, many minions of like elves in a workshop writing letters to people.
I can't wait for this thing.
I don't know how to segue this. What are you up to these days?
I was just thinking about all the Christmas cards I like to send and receive during the holidays. So I don't think you're alone.
Yeah.
And I had my wheels turning about, the mental health crisis. This isn't obviously what I'm up to these days, but the mental health crisis and the ability to have an anonymized pen pal that you could
that's great.
send a message to and communicate with. Or whether it's letter mail or email, whatever it might be, that actually could probably be pretty helpful.
Unfortunately, it'll be solved by AI,
That's not the end of the world.
The random hallucinations.
What am I up to these days? I have 2 full-time jobs.
Okay.
One is my day job where I get paid, and the other one is being a mom. I wouldn't call it a job, obviously, but it does take up a great deal of time.
It's your profession.
I think it's an important thing to acknowledge to young parents, and especially to people who don't have kids, that, the
Work.
amount of quote unquote personal time that you get as a parent of young children is finite and fleeting and unpredictable. I heard a funny quote the other day from someone who said that the one thing no one told me before I became a parent is how many times I'd have to get up from where I was sitting. I loved it.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyways,
So
My
true.
daughter and I were timing my wife. We were like, how long is she gonna sit there for? And we take bets, and it's really funny because my wife's just getting up every 2 minutes. Not even, it was I think 38 seconds is what we counted.
Oh dear.
how old's your daughter?
6.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we were doing that with another friend of hers who's also 6. And it turns out that the kids are the same. Boys, especially boys. Boys do keep running, man.
They
keep
do.
going.
I have one of each. And the boy
different, right?
is setting a precedent, an energy precedent in the house, activity precedent.
You
It's
gotta keep up.
got to keep up. Last night we rearranged all the furniture in the house, turned it into a boat,
Wow.
traversed the great oceans.
It's another precedent you just set there because now boat time is a thing.
Oh, yes.
Or was it always was that the first time you introduced boat time? Or
I did not introduce it.
okay,
He was more free flowing. We have very malleable furniture
right.
in our house, so he was more free flowing on this concept. And I'm not going to discourage the creativity
No.
in that
You're on,
respect.
man. That's wicked.
It's better than TV. So,
Yeah, that's fair.
but yeah, that's what I'm up to.
Wait, so for the money.
Oh, yes.
That's
So
the other thing.
that one. So about, I guess, a year and a half ago, well, I would say almost 2 years, I started to make the pivot away from venture capital, which I'd spent, about 6 years on and off,
Right.
focused on, into executive search. And that's what I'm doing now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I joined a firm called TrueSearch. We're the 6th largest executive search firm in North America. I think a lot of people don't realize that because we're very different from the other 5. They like to call them the Shrek firms. That was an acronym that I didn't know entering this market, but I think Martin's well aware.
No, I would.
You've never heard
Can,
of
can it
Shrek?
be defined? Can we define
Break
it?
down that.
Yeah, it's Spencer Stewart, Heydrich, Russell Reynolds, Egon Zender, and Korn Ferry.
All
Shrek.
names, right?
Big, incredible, long-standing executive search firms.
But names of people.
Yes.
Even Korn
Founded
Ferry
those.
versus True it's just
It's
okay.
its
Let's not
own
name
brand.
it after. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's unique.
Yeah, it is. And we're very specifically, our founders, and I won't get too deep into this, but our founders actually built a firm, sold it to Heydrich, went there for 2 years, had an okay time, but realized in being in that environment that things needed to and deserved to change. We needed to create the right methodology, the right technology, and the right process to better serve the innovation economy and specifically venture-backed companies. And so they left after, doing their time at Heydrich, they left and started TrueSearch. And they started just working with venture capital firms in their portfolios. And the big change at that point was creating a technology that gave full access to the client as to where we were at in the search process.
Yeah, because that's a big black box, right? So
There's no black box at our firm. Every single client has access to the technology, which means you can see at any given time the entire market we've mapped, every conversation, every single candidate, where they're at, when we've spoken to them, even down to what the correspondence was about. And you can also, as a result, have more input from your clients and from the partners you're working with on an ongoing basis of what works, what doesn't. We're also mapping the market of companies we're going after at the same time, and you can just sort of cross-pollinate that. The company is huge now, though. This is the biggest company I've ever worked for. I think we're 700 to 800 folks, 200 partners, give or take, globally. We're in 22 countries. It could be 23.
That's big.
It's big.
Yeah,
How
bigger
wait-
than I thought.
Yeah.
How long have you been there for?
I've been there a year and a half.
And how old is the firm?
12 years.
Okay. Incredible.
That's massive for that time period on an agency, because there's been a bunch that have been around for 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
and there's still 50, 100 people.
The other big differentiator for us, which is one of the many reasons I joined the firm, is that we are only evaluated on an NPS score. So every other firm often is measuring their partners based on the amount of business they're bringing in, and that's just not what we care about. If we can keep an incredibly high bar of quality and bar of excellence with our clients, the work will naturally come. And that feels amazing. It feels great to work with folks every single day who know that that's the only thing we're driving towards is excellence in what we're executing on. And I think that's a big differentiator that, frankly, anyone who is hiring an executive search firm doesn't know about, because that's just not always what's advertised. But
yeah, I mean, like,
That's
I
cool.
remember there was I dated this girl. When was that, man? A while ago, obviously, because I've been married for a long time. But I remember Yorkville, in the summer, used to be teeming after work with all of these recruiters having drinks on the roof of Remy's. That was like the place. You know that place?
Yeah, I should know.
oh yeah,
Yeah, the big, and now it's
been a
Casamoto or
minute.
something, right?
yeah.
But yeah, all these recruiters, and they used to talk. And so my girlfriend at the time worked at this recruiting firm, but she was like front desk. They kept telling her, "Oh, you'd be great at this. You should be a recruiter." No, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And because all of them were like snorting coke in the bathroom all day long and just closing deals, man. These guys were making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars and buying new cars all the time, and places in Muskoka and stuff. And they were just, because it was all about closing rate, right?
Yeah.
And this must have been like 20 years ago. Yeah, almost. Wow. And it was just like the opposite of what I imagined needing. If you want to put good people into a company to build a culture, blah, 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 you know, like you don't want to hire some people that don't know anything about you, that don't care who they put in your job, as long as that person's going to stay there to get their commission, and just be like, you know, pumping it. That's so ridiculous. But
it's kind of sad. I mean,
is that still happening though in the do you think out there in the world of recruiting?
I think that there's a low bar in recruiting, external recruiting, and I'm actually not knocking if there's anyone listening to this like who works in that field. You're probably nodding because like it's true. I think the problem is there's so much emphasis on the close versus the success of the placement. I think that using a methodology like we are at True of quality over quantity, like that changes the culture, it changes the outcome, it changes how your staff are invested in the outcome as well. And I think that's important. But I do think it's still a huge issue. The reality is like most of executive search hasn't changed. And I'm not just talking about executive search, just search more generally. It's still like very behind. And we can dive into this like whole next topic, which is how AI is going to possibly change the world of recruitment. And I really hope it does. I spend at least like 10% of my time every single week researching and talking to all sorts of different founders that are trying to disrupt this space, because there are aspects even of my job week over week that need to disappear, you know, like that need to be automated so I can spend more time having quality conversations with my partners and having quality conversations with candidates and finding the right person for the job versus sending emails and taking notes and scanning, you know, LinkedIn profiles and job description or resumes and whatnot. Like it's just all, there needs to be a computer that does this for us.
It's funny because we started off the conversation with just the idea of product-led growth. And what we're talking about from a problem perspective, it seems like it's happening or True's done in the sense that the traditional model of recruitment where it's like, yeah, we want, what's the lever that we can pull as a business, as a recruiting agency, so that we grow our business. And they're just throwing money. Oh, we'll just give a higher percentage to our recruiters. And that means we'll close more business. And because of the function of the role, like the role that recruiters have in a third party sort of worse helping a client, the more you close doesn't necessarily mean quality, right? You said, you know, quality over quantity. And so to take that model and switch, and that sounds very much like product-led growth, right? You're listening to your customer. What does your customer need, right?
Sure.
Versus I'm very charming and I know how to like convince people. So I'm just going to say, hire this person because they're my candidate and you're going to pay me a fee. And I'm going to tell you all the things you want to hear. Use your fears as a business owner against you in the sense that like, well, we've got this, you reached out to us in the first place by not filling this role. What's the cost of that? But then flipping the model and actually saying, okay, no, like we're going to do things differently. And the NPS thing, I think, would scare a lot of people, especially from the traditional model where, you know, it doesn't matter how much business you've closed. It matters whether or not the clients would come back to you.
Yeah. Anybody I've talked to at our firm who came from one of those bigger firms or just more traditional models and were told that the way we do things here is, you know, the client can see your entire pipeline at any given time, they were terrified.
Yeah,
because they were used to scrambling and pulling together 4 names for the upcoming meeting and throwing those into a Google sheet so that the client was satisfied that they had been doing something.
It's so pathetic, man.
The other thing you were just touching on is like so much of the recruitment world, it's like the peak or the climax was the sale, not the execution. And I think,
the result.
Or the result, for sure. That's what I'm saying. It was like the start, like closing the money versus actually executing on that search. And so I've been having a ton of fun, but I have to say, like, people don't like recruiters. It's interesting to be in this seat where I am also at a really interesting phase in my journey as a recruiter because I didn't start in this world. I have naturally followed a path of curiosity in talent. I
Right.
didn't come from talent. It's just something that I've loved doing. And I'm new to executive search in some ways. And I'm very, very focused on quality over quantity right now. And I know that's the only way I can do it. And so I'm spending a lot of time being very thoughtful about the few searches that I want to focus on instead of trying to get on as many searches as possible.
Yeah.
And I know that that's the right move.
Mm.
And it's the thing I love to do.
It's so interesting because I think there is a lot of change in already happening in this world, and part of that change for the last 5 years that I've seen, maybe it's been longer. I guess it's been longer. It's been a couple decades almost. Is companies trying to find talent themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and again, you're working on this, I guess probably primarily, I don't know, sub 1,000 staff, or maybe larger if you're like Series B, Series C, clients. How big are the teams that are hiring that are your clients?
The companies that we're working with, honestly, we now work with early stage all the way to public markets.
Right, so that could
So
be huge. Right?
it depends. And I sort of sit across venture as well as private equity.
Right. Okay, so this is interesting because how many of your clients have internal talent acquisition, offices?
Tons.
Right.
I think that's the differentiator with executive search versus search more broadly. It's like if they have an in-house talent lead, they're going to be managing anything junior, mid, or even director level. But often when it comes to some of these executive leadership positions, they're so niche what they're looking for and so specialized that having the additional support of an executive search partner who already has a ton of depth in that area, specificity in their asset class, the function, and the industry means that they can have a higher guarantee of finding that person and mapping that market, accessing those people, and actually just getting the right person into the seat.
Does this include also finding board members?
Yeah, definitely.
Board search is an interesting thing.
Yeah. I like board search. I did a placement last year, and it was one of the more interesting, fun placements to do. I like talking to people that want to sit on boards. I think, first of all, everyone responds to your message if you're a recruiter and you're saying, I have a board position. So
Yeah.
that's
interesting. Really? Everyone's excited about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think everyone aspires to try or continue to expand on their board positions. I think it's a nice place to be. But it's also really, really hard. There's a lot of political dynamic on a board. There's a lot of different players. They're not all from the same company. They all have different ideas often. Ideally, the board is aligned on what they need if they're adding someone new.
I'd love to sit on like 20 boards, and that'd be my life. 10.
Right?
10. Well comped, 5. I'd sit on 2. I just pay me a lot. I'll be there. It'd be great. No, because I feel like it's a unique thing. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off before you say it, but like the way I look at it is like shed of the responsibility of operations, right? And only being able to offer insight and connectivity to benefit the leadership team's direction. I would feel so free and enabled, operations, is a quagmire for some people because it takes you away from that good stuff that even leadership teams want to ultimately be able to have that visionary perspective and look at kind of like larger things. And also, I guess just that idea of being able to also try and add some objectivity. It's not just about subjectivity, into these things and find common ground amongst the people on the rest of the board. I think it's cool, man.
Yeah.
It seems really interesting. And I don't know, I have a question about this, follow-up question. So with young companies, what have you seen as a difference from old companies? I don't know where you're going to draw the line in the aging of them, but for how they use their boards. If at all. If I don't know, you might not have a data.
I don't know if I've I guess from my time in venture, I have a little bit more exposure to that. I think a really exciting inflection point for a young company is when you add the first independent board director,
Right.
which is, not your investor, not your co-founders, and not your CFO. It's someone net new that you need on the board. They fill a gap in the knowledge of your board, the expertise that is very critical to your industry, your stage, where you're going. I would say that's probably, I wouldn't say that's the differentiator, but that's also like a great inflection point. Often early stage boards are just very insular. It's your founding team and maybe one of your investors, whereas later stage boards, public market boards, you're looking at an entirely different makeup of professionals who really can represent your industry and all of the different things that you need. I think there's, and I know I'm not wrong in saying this, there's a lot of risk early on in venture-backed companies putting the wrong investors on their boards. And I've spoken to lots of my founder friends who have successfully exited their businesses and still feel like they made a huge mistake along the way in putting the wrong people in seat. So I think that despite how hard it can be when you're raising money to say no to someone that refuses to give you a check without getting a board seat, if you really can't see that person having your best interests at heart, like it's not worth it.
Yeah. But at the same time, I've seen so many early stage founders in Canada, especially first, second time, like kind of they're just trying to get their thing off the ground, just do it, and they don't know enough about business. But like, or what most people, I guess, who are starting companies, and if you're listening to this or watching this and you are, starting your first venture and you haven't had exposure to the 5-year timeline of a new venture, at least those first 5 years, you might not have the perspective that I think everyone should have, which is imagine this company and getting it off the ground is going to take 25 years, right? So be committed to being present in the moment as your role as a leader to have to navigate whatever, drama, tragedy, and obstacle comes your way, because it's part of business. And it's not just part of, the first few days of a venture formation. And so to that note, what I've seen a lot of is early stage companies taking advice because they don't have the knowledge base on their leadership team from day one to navigate, certain obstacles. And the advice, for some reason, especially in Canada, they always look to investors for advice.
Right.
I'm like, no, because typically for early stage, especially SaaS companies, like this, the return expectation of the investment is discommensurate with your freedoms as an operator and even your ability to align with your vision for what a market needs even. Often cases, it's like, the investor perspective is like, give me 1,000 times my money. They don't know what the hell you're trying to do.
Yeah.
They know what the potentiality of what you're doing is, but they don't know how to get you there.
Yeah. One of the best things that I learned when I was actually at Drive Capital working with Robert Hatta, who's a wonderful human. Anytime someone in our portfolio was trying to hire an executive, like thought they knew the direction they needed to go to move the needle on their business, we would put them in front of that talent immediately. Not because they could hire that person, but because if they describe what they're looking for and we can make sure they have a conversation with at least one of those individuals that meets that job spec, they can learn so much more about how they're potentially completely off base or they're heading in the right direction and actually properly align themselves with peer mentors that make sense. Yeah. Because to your point, often the founder relationship is just with their investor and not with the suite of professionals that actually understand what it means to hire for those roles or to move in that direction. And I still recommend that to anyone today. It's like, you want to hire a CMO that has 10 years experience, that understands X, Y, and Z, like just knock on their door. You don't even need the intro. Go find them and tell them, I don't want to hire you. I want to hear your story. I want your advice. I'm a young founder. I'm trying to figure this out and I want to hire for this. And 20 minutes of your time could be a game changer for me.
I think that's such a pro tip. The idea that in any aspect of your business, if you want to prepare for the next step, you need to start framing the context of being at that next step in your brain, and socialize that with your existing team if you're able to, and that's another interesting thing, is I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, both of you guys. Like as an early stage company, when you're forming your team, you're growing your team, often cases you end up bringing on people that are close to you, right? Before you start spending the money on talent acquisition in a competitive way, you might be like, I need a dude tomorrow. I've got a problem and I can't think about it. I'm the founder. I've got so many things I can't think about. I want people to start working on these things. And you go and you try and like fill out your team. And you see a lot of churn in early stage companies in leadership positions, especially because of this, right? The wrong person in the wrong job, or compensation is not aligned with what their expectations are, or the ESOP hasn't been carved out and the promise of stock is like dangling all the time, or whatever reason. But this idea of anything in your experience or otherwise perspective that you can offer on this, like as companies have a little bit more, if not just money to spend on top tier hires, or hires that are more aligned with what they need, or time, and how those two kind of balance out.
I want to know what Martin has to say.
One thing to mention is that's the clip right there for the podcast in terms of the piece of advice you just gave. It was just meet the person. I just wanted to say that, like that's next level. And a lot of what we're talking about translates, like maybe not the level of importance from like choosing your board member or choosing an executive. The same stuff applies. Like they're all the same fundamental principles that apply to like all hiring. So especially at an early stage company, you have to be really intentional about who you surround yourself. This has been talked about forever. Like this isn't new information, but I think the challenge is there is so much pressure. Let's say like a company before they have an HR person, or a company before they have a talent acquisition person who can do the work. There's so much work to be done that doing the work of hiring isn't being done properly. And you actually would do yourself a favor by spending more time on the hiring piece and sacrificing what might feel like short-term wins and long-term, like moving the milestone towards like the North Star or whatever, by just being way more intentional about the hires you make. Because, you know, at a 5-person company and you hire one wrong person, they might not end up being misaligned for 6 months, but what's the cost of 6 months of misalignment for a 5-person company versus a 50-person company? That's like decision that you cannot afford. Like that kills a company right away. So I think my perspective is, you know, cliche, but hire slow, fire fast, right? Like you can't afford not to. But so many times the business is pushing back on you to like hire fast. And then you don't even know.
Right.
Right.
Another thought I have, a couple thoughts on this. Number one, you have to think about talent holistically. There's not just a pool of people you could hire and a pool of people who work for you. There are so many different formats of talented people that you need to keep in your orbit. And that includes your investors, your peer mentors, your advisors, your customers.
Yeah.
All of these people are part of, and this comes back to the beginning, the community that you're building by and for these people. And one of the most successful things that a founder can do is think about talent holistically in terms of who you can hire today and who you want to hire tomorrow. Find the aspirational people that can guide you in specific domains. So your future chief product officer, your future, CMO, your future chief revenue officer, whoever that might be. Leverage them and their knowledge, and then hopefully one day when you're ready to hire them, they're a full fuck yes to the experience, because they know you, you know them, you've built the relationship. But it also means that you can take that time to build those relationships and move slowly, and also still surround yourself with expertise that spans like the journey of the company you're trying to build. And this comes back to also talent foresight. Companies are often just so reactive. Like we needed this person 6 months ago. And that's also why executive search partners are hired is because, or search partners in general. We needed this person 6 months ago. We tried to find them. We didn't do it well, or like we haven't. We hired the wrong person.
Indeed.com.
Yeah, right. And now it's urgent. Whereas if you start to really think thoughtfully, like pick your head up and say, you know, where am I going? Like other people have traversed this road before me. I'm not the only person that's ever done this. Where am I going to be going in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah.
Where do I think I'm going? And how can I start to make a proper plan around that? And it's still part of that like slow, calculated journey of hiring, but it means that you're not just constantly tripping over yourself, panicking, and doing it hastily.
It's interesting because, like, you know what, fundamentally, I think there's a missing piece here, especially for early stage. No, it's not even for any company because there's no such thing as a late stage company anymore. They're just like a lot of dinosaurs that don't have any food to eat. You get it? You agree with me?
I mean, the visual's interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I keep talking to people where they're like, all these large enterprises that are publicly traded, that have been publicly traded for so long, have run out of the cash reserves, and they can't create new markets, and they're trying to, you know, buy their way into market relevance, they're all like just grasping at things as they're falling down the pit. And you're seeing, of course, a lot of good companies more than ever before, at least on as far as I know, TSX, probably the New York Stock Exchange as well, in the last year, more companies than ever before per capita have been bought back from public market and made private.
Right.
So the good guys are getting privatized because there's a model there that can be, you know, optimized. And everyone else out there in the public market.
There is, from a search perspective, for me, there's been no greater flex in the past few years than working with a privately held, fully bootstrapped, profitable business.
Right.
Because of everything that's happened in the markets, there's a huge lack of trust, especially for talent and smart people, about what their equity would even be valued at if they were to join this super sexy company that raised a ton of money. And so there's just a bit of a reckoning, I think, in venture, and everyone in venture knows that. But it's also just a really interesting time to be a profitable bootstrapped business, where I think before it wasn't.
Well, like, look, I mean,
as attractive.
It's taken Jason Fried 20 years to become a celebrity online, right? That guy's all over LinkedIn every day. He comments on 5,000 posts a day. He's just got 25. He's like Nataraja with all his arms, you know, just on keyboards.
LinkedIn is an evolving space for that reason. I feel like when Elon took over Twitter, it became
first name basis, eh?
Yeah, yeah, right. There's just a shift, at least for me as a woman,
Brother
there's a
Elon.
shift in energy. Like it's very dark, like very masculine. And anyone who knows me knows I was very active on Twitter. I basically haven't said anything in 2 years. And I'm off Instagram. That's a whole other fun frontier.
Am I getting you both on air chat? Is this going to happen?
Oh, yeah. I love a voice note. I'm in.
Yeah, you mentioned this thing. We'll go down that road, but I'm gonna put a pin in it if I can.
No. I was just
so you can continue.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what we were talking about.
You were talking about like how Twitter has changed. You were saying how like LinkedIn particularly is going through this evolution.
I think some people are complaining that people are posting too much personal stuff on LinkedIn, but I personally kind of like it. I like this bridge between the facade of who you're supposed to be at work and the person you're supposed to be at home.
Yeah.
I feel like I had this realization at a really critical point in my career where I felt like every time I went to work or anytime I was showing up at my job, I was almost putting on a costume.
Right.
The mask.
Yeah. It's like,
mask.
I'm trying to be something that I'm not. And at some point, events transpire in your life that change the way you think about how you need to spend your time and energy. And I just started showing up as myself. And I think like people often tell me that they're grateful for that, which I find very humbling because I'm not doing anything other than hopefully being a mirror for someone else in that respect, which is like if I show up as myself in my job, in my life, my work, hopefully it'll inspire someone else to do the same, because it's so exhausting to pretend to be
100%.
someone else.
Mm.
It is like you go home at the end of the day, and I bet there's at least one person that's going to listen to this that feels shitty about their work. And a lot of this ties back to psychological safety at work.
course,
And this is the HR term for it, like not feeling that you can be yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think what's interesting about this evolution of LinkedIn is that we're starting to see people for who they are. And I recently put out a pretty vulnerable post on LinkedIn for this reason. It was like a choice I had to make at work. I had to sort of take a step back, put the brakes on. I just came back from mat leave. I went full force. It was too much. I put the brakes on, and I expressed this to other parents on LinkedIn, because I think that often parents hide in the dark and kind of laugh maniacally when they're having conversations with non-parent colleagues, like, haha,
Yeah.
everything's okay. And
Right. Oh, exactly. It does get maniacal.
so it's cool. It's cool, but it's very active. And there's also the other side of it, which is some people just posting so much that is maybe inauthentic to who they
for sure.
really are, and that can be exhausting as well. Is there a mute button on LinkedIn? I don't even know. I haven't
You
used
can
it yet.
unfollow.
Yeah. You can unfollow, but you can also, there was something else I saw recently. They're definitely playing with this. There's lots of like product evolution happening, behind the scenes.
It's moving
then-
faster now. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they're rolling out features with like subsets of user groups. So it's not
Right.
like, it's dynamic. It's dynamic as a product.
Martin, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the people space. I know it's a really challenging time for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And people and folks in that space, because companies went full throttle on people and culture for many years and have very much pulled back on that. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in the market right now? What are some of the grievances and challenges?
Yeah.
I'm really curious.
Yeah, and last week you just had the summer social, so I'm sure you socialized some of these trends with people in
I just
person,
said
right?
hi to like 100 people
Yeah.
for 3 minutes, and we didn't get deep on anything. So this is
It's the hard part about being a host.
Yes. No, but from that, well, the trends that I see from like the community as a whole is we're seeing more people looking for work than ever.
Right.
And that's been within the last year or so. I would say within the last 3 months, there's this window that's opened up to give a breath of fresh air in terms of like, we're seeing more people make changes and like
Yeah.
get the jobs and find new positions. But to your point, what's the trends in terms of, we saw everybody's interest and almost, when the market was frothy, is that what the folks call it?
Sounds nice. Go for it.
Yeah. When the market was frothy, everybody was investing in like, oh, we see that we're investing in people. And so the first thing that got cut when things got hard was DEI budgets. Like
Yeah.
that's the step back that we saw with the market. And now we're seeing folks trying to, like, what do we do now? Everybody's doing more with less. And now people are trying with there's an interesting tangent where you can add AI into this, because you're doing more with less, and now AI is going to be this thing that helps you do that. So there's this, another window's opened up for folks who are working, who are like, I used to have a team of 3 or 4, and now I have a team of 2 or 1, and it's just me, but I can get my job done, and I have these expectations, but I've got AI in several ways, shapes, and forms supporting me on some of the administrative things that took me longer, so I can actually function and deliver what my team of 3 or 4 used to.
Right.
Would I say that that's like a good example, like a 1-to-4 ratio or something like that? No. What I think in terms of every platform that people use is baking in some form of AI into their processes to reduce the administrative
So that
friction.
whole co-pilot approach to things, like the AI is there to help you
Yeah.
be more efficient, be faster.
Yeah. and that's happening in small ways. Um, what I what I do see though, like that's kind of more like the negative lens. What I do think positively that has come out of this is that the companies that like really scaled back felt the pain of not having good people and culture systems and operations in place. And they're like, oh shit, we actually do need people to help run this organization. And there is something tangible about having a good culture. And it's not something that like the executive team can hold up on their own. There's a lot of work that goes
Yeah.
into it behind the scenes.
I always say to companies that don't have any HR, it's often like the COO, co-founder
Right,
of the
right.
business. Like a single junior HR hire,
Mhm.
it's going to cost you, I don't know, in Toronto, $70,000,
Mm-hmm.
give or take. How much is it costing you in churn right now
Yeah,
and
exactly.
talent?
Talent
that you
talent
can't
retention
keep.
alone, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's costing you way too much money. And you also don't need to just hire, you don't actually have to hire a full-time employee. There are lots of amazing organizations out there that will step in on a fractional basis, including Martin's company. Not that this was not a forced plug,
Yes.
Purple Umbrella.
Here's the 20.
I have seen it firsthand using these organizations as a bridge when you're not quite ready to hire that full-time person and getting the professional support you need
Mm-hmm.
to put the right paperwork, the right foundations, the right policies in place so you can breathe a sigh of relief at the end of the day.
One thing to double down on that, and I'm just going to skirt around the like people upside, but thank you.
Yeah.
Is like you were talking about people needing to look at things differently just as a whole. So if we see business like at a high level and we say, okay, I'm a founder, I've got this pain point, this is the problem, I'm going to hire a person for it. And going back to your kind of comment on like, oh, we need a CMO because our marketing is just right shit. We don't do marketing. I need a CMO. I need a VP marketing, whatever, right? That's the natural,
Yeah.
that's the thought process, right? You're swamped as a founder or whatever. So you're going to go say that. And then you meet 2 or 3 VPs of people or CMOs and you go through the process. And most likely you're going to realize we don't actually need that, right?
Yeah, it's
That's
like, oh
usually,
no, we're going down a rabbit hole.
hmm,
This is gonna be like too much. The questions they're asking
yeah,
of us are like we don't have answers for, and it's kind of like, why can't they just come and figure that out?
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, no, you're there. There's that, and then I think the thing that's interesting, right? Because it's no longer a frothy market, so it's not like okay, we can afford. Previously, you could afford to make that mistake. Technically, you can't actually afford to make the mistake, but you had the money to make it
yeah,
from like
for venture-backed
from
companies. Yeah.
venture-backed company perspective, right? But now, what I think, since everybody is like closing in on budgets and being more conservative, they're looking at talent in a very different way. And one of the most interesting things is how do we like fractional is very popular as a word right now. I use it every day, but that it applies to every role. So you could, is this a project we could get taken care of by Upwork or a platform like that, as opposed to like, here's a problem, we could solve it with like some work done by, a third party for, a fraction of the cost. Or do we need someone for 1-2 days a week, just to help out so we can test this idea, right? If we need to. And I don't think that's the thinking around how to solve problems at a company through a human being has always been around a full-time position. Like the amount of
Right.
times I've worked at, it's like 4 or 5 startups in the last decade. I think we maybe had like, I've hired for like 4 part-time positions. And even part-time was like in the most traditional sense of like 20 hours a week.
It's very risky for the individuals who are fractional to make that choice.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel frustrated about it because I think like the way our government is set up is we're not incentivized to be independent contractors. And if you are, you're taking on a ton of risk. And
What's the risk? What is that risk?
I mean, there's a lot of upside to doing your own billing and making your own money, and there's a lot of taxable benefits. But
I see it as the opposite, saying that might be a perspective thing.
I guess like my perspective on it is that I completely agree with what Martin's saying, which is that like a lot of the more successful companies early stage say like, how can I get pieces of what I'm seeking?
Right. We want solutions.
So I can figure out where the greatest demand is. Like you hire this part-time performance marketer and you realize that this is a huge opportunity in your business. You offer that person a full-time job. Or, maybe they're fractional. They help you hire someone full-time. They train them, whatever that might look like. However, those individuals, like, you go to the bank to try and get a mortgage when you're an independent contractor, and the bank's like, you're too high risk. We're going to charge you way more.
Yeah, you don't have a job. I work for myself. What? You're unemployed? No, I employ myself. You're unemployed? I had this discussion with a customs officer as I was on a train moving to New York for a job, and it was a whole thing. I was getting a TN visa, then I got my TN visa, and then they didn't know what a TN visa was. Yeah. Yeah.
The other challenge is we want more. This is a bit of a divergence, but I'm going to go for it, which is like we want more women to become entrepreneurs. This is a problem. We don't have enough women running their own businesses.
Sure.
We're not the way in which parental leave is paid out, maternity leave is paid out and structured in Canada is that you have to be paying into EI in your business for more than 12 months in order to qualify for maternity leave benefits. So if someone starts a business and doesn't have the luxury of paying into EI and CPP and all those benefits programs right away, and they get pregnant running their own business, they get nothing from the government unless they've been paying in for 12 months.
Is that different anywhere else?
In other countries?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I just know that this is a huge pain point for a lot of women who were just not setting them up for success. And a lot of women want to start businesses once they hit their 30s. They're like, now I think I'm ready. I think like anyone, you might reach that inflection point. So anyways, that was a bit of a divergence, but I do agree that the fractional model is becoming more and more popular. Also for any company, like we have a bunch of different products at True, which is also really interesting to be a part of. We love thinking about going beyond just executive search and adding different product lines to the business. And one that we have is called TrueBridge, and it's a fractional executive program. This could be someone who, and I'm going to probably butcher this, but like this could be someone, like if someone comes to us and says we need the CMO, I like how the CMO is very popular today.
Yeah,
but we need them now, and we have no time to wait. We pattern match them to TrueBridge, and they find themselves a fractional CMO.
Yeah.
And while we run the search, and sometimes that CMO becomes part of the search process, which is great. Like that individual can kind of like weigh in on their expertise and the inner workings of the business. Other times it's like a transitionary period, whether if the business is going public or whatever that might be. And sometimes they actually just hire that person. So that's like a whole other realm. But the fractional role can be very adaptive to the needs of the company at that moment, which I think is really cool.
I have this amazing kind of expectation of people who are young and scratching their heads in leadership positions in Canada to try and figure out how they can kind of soundboard things and get insights and become better leaders. This was vocalized on an episode that will drop in a week or so with a guy named Mac that was on the podcast last week, Startwell podcast, who does this kind of leadership mentorship stuff. But question to you is about this fractional role and how it can be fulfilled by our underemployed Canadians.
Yeah.
Like I really think there's far too many people that have retired out for whatever reason as young as 55 in Canada that have a wealth of experience, a wealth of ability still. We shouldn't put them out to pasture on that green armchair in Muskoka, as TD will have you believe is the future.
I hope not.
All the banks are like, retire. This is our advertising, right? It's like, yeah, we want to work so hard so we can just sit on our ass and not do anything. That's a good life. No, that's not the way people think about things. Anyway, question. older people that are retiring out, bringing them back for fractional roles. And is that a thing? Does that happen?
Definitely. I think we all know of at least one person who has quote unquote retired in their lifetime and then immediately realized that the thing they like to do with their time is work. And they just need to find a more creative way to define what work looks like in retirement. So yes, definitely. And that's where obviously board work is something we talked about, but
Right.
also being able to, in spending time talking to folks about board positions, you learn that there's a lot of individuals out there that will work until the day they die, but they're designing their lives later in life around things that they're deeply passionate about. So they're often doing 2 or 3 jobs, 3 or 4 jobs at any given time, sitting on boards, doing some fractional work, whatever that might look like. And I think it's a great model. We also lost the plot. It's like a very Gen Z thing to say, but we lost the plot somewhere as millennials and Gen Zers on the apprenticeship model. There became this obsession with being a founder and being everything and Googling it yourself and fake it till you make it. And I think that some people, it's just taking us longer, in my opinion, to get where we need to go when we're not really just raising our hand saying, I don't know what I'm doing. Can someone help me? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
does someone who
culturally-
knows?
I think this is, I've talked to a lot of people about this being the kind of like certain degradation of the Canadian, industry and economy post NAFTA agreement. So going back to the early 90s where that culture in manufacturing particularly was like anchored well in our culture. The making of things required, sacred knowledge to be passed down in a sense. And in the office, that doesn't happen as often, especially when it's Shankfest downtown, on Bay Street. No, seriously, like a lot of enterprise has corrosive culture, right?
Yeah.
And so in many ways, people don't think of their own knowledge as something that they would share, or if they did, it would be with the politically chosen disciple.
Or they're just not being asked.
Sure.
This is something I talk about.
Well, yeah, if you work
all
for
the
a bank, you
time.
can't walk around. Did you know that? You can't walk around.
What do you mean?
If I work at RBC, I'm not allowed to walk around. I can't just go check in on other RBC offices. Hey, Bob, what do you do? I work on the 17th floor. I'm down here on the 11th floor trying to learn what everyone does. Get out of here.
I didn't
Chased
know
around with a broom. No, what I'm saying is there isn't a culture that's
of course.
participatory. Like, no one knows what other people do around them in their own office.
Yeah. Well, what I was saying is that, like, when I talk to candidates, I spend a bunch of time talking to folks that I'm not placing.
Yeah.
Because it's always been my favorite thing to do. And it was very much a nature of what I was doing at Drive Capital, at Golden Ventures, and even in my time building Prospect, is fundamentally just being helpful to connecting people into our Canadian ecosystem. But one of the things I always recommend to people is just like reach out.
Yeah.
Don't just reach out to folks. Like if you're on the job hunt and thinking about what you're doing next, there's nothing that other people like more than talking about themselves. And you can learn a lot by not asking them for a job, being very specific of, I am so impressed with your career. I am in this phase and I'm trying to I'm trying to follow the same path. I would love, again, 20 minutes of your time to just understand your story, how you got there, stumbling blocks, like great choices, if you're open to it. And I'm telling you, people answer those messages. They definitely don't answer the message of, hey, I'm on the job hunt. Would you mind taking 20 minutes to talk to me? It's not, that's an ask for you, not a true description of what it is you're seeking out of that person.
Yeah, definitely. For our audience that wants to pick up on this point, I think it's an important one. The idea that we've already kind of framed this idea that companies should be doing this, right? If you need information and you want to prepare for the future, what do? You do some research. That research ideally is firsthand, and you're looking for the people that have the best opinion. To this end, I would add to your point that showing vulnerability specifically, not I'm looking for a job and I can't feed my kids,
Yeah.
but you want to learn something. You don't have critical insight into something. You might have an idea about something like, hey, I'm looking for this kind of position right now, but I want to make sure that, it fits my skill because I used to work for that organization. I don't know. It depends on how
Totally.
contextual you want to be. But give people something they can grasp that's not transactional. As soon as it becomes transactional which, and by the way, no one wants to go for coffee, okay? So
What are we doing right now?
no, I know, but
Kidding.
that's the worst line. That like, hey, I'd love to grab your, because all of the SRDs or SDRs or BDRs or SDRs or whatever the hell that people call them, sales, like lead discovery.
Let's go for
sales,
coffee.
right? It's always coffee. Let's go for coffee. Let's go for coffee, and that's hit the scripts.
Yeah. Let's go for coffee. Don't say that.
Yeah.
And I want to pick your brain. Also, don't say that, even if it's kind of the truth. I said it this morning. I texted it and I got a call back. Whoops. But yes, this is such important advice. And I see it firsthand. I feel like a lot, because for every person we let into the community, I add them on LinkedIn. So I've got a crazy amount of folks reaching out on LinkedIn on a regular basis. The amount of inbound messages from people who are adept enough to say, oh, he's got a big network of HR folks, I should probably have a chat with him.
Mm-hmm.
But just in terms of the messaging, they just fall flat because it goes down to this static, pre-baked message that they're probably sending out to 100 different people. And as like an executive recruiter, you know how important that, like, that's your first impression, right?
It's so funny. This is what I'm truly bad at when it comes to search is the mass messages. I can't do it. I tried it. I came back from mat leave recently and I tried it because I was like trying to be efficient, and it wasn't a mass message, but LinkedIn has all of these new AIs and templates.
Oh,
Honestly,
yeah.
I hate it. Every time they fill in what they think I should say, I'm like immediately deleting it. But you have to customize every single message. These are humans on the other end.
Yeah.
It really matters what you're saying to them.
Also, pro tip, LinkedIn
Yeah.
pro tip, sorry to cut you off. For anyone in the audience that wants to get someone's attention on LinkedIn, this is a great hack. Okay? Don't message that person. What? You want to reach out to them? Don't message them. How will we get their attention? Great question. Tag them in a post that's relevant to them. That's an awesome bit of content. Or better yet, someone ancillary to them. I don't know if you guys may not agree with this, but like, get someone's attention before, so you can warm them to yourself is all I'm saying. Maybe don't tag them on something like, hey, Jim, I saw Jim through the window and he was eating something at Starbucks he shouldn't have.
Yeah,
Not
don't
like
do
that.
Bad idea.
No, but like bring people into the dialogue, and then you have a connection to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll say it like that, and then, you know, strategies.
I think some people are not as active on LinkedIn. Like there's all sorts
Totally.
of people listening that would say like, well, Cosmo, I don't post on LinkedIn, so I don't know how I would make that happen. I just really still believe that it comes down to just being incredibly authentic about, I mean, you could be authentic about what you need from that person and say, I need a job, and it's not going to go anywhere. But what you're really seeking truly at the end of the day is to build a relationship. It's a two-way street. I've only ever gotten by in my life and my career by entering any conversation believing it's a two-way street and that I want to help that person as much as I'm seeking perhaps knowledge or advice or whatever from them. And if it goes nowhere, who cares, right? Like you have to walk into it really with a helper's mindset, in my opinion.
Back in the day in the plateau in the 90s in Montreal, there was a guy. There was this dude with a picnic basket, right? And he used to he loved DJs. It was like not weird or like sexy or anything. It was just he loved hanging out with DJs. And so he always used to invite all of us DJs over for a sandwich. That was his in thing. That was his thing. And if people were weirded out by coming over to his house for a sandwich, he would invite them to go shopping for ingredients for a sandwich.
I love this.
Like it worked.
No, I love this. It makes
worked.
a lot
So
of sense.
We'd go up to like, you know, the European deli and just like choose cheese with him and go shopping.
Martin knows this. He came to my house for a dinner once that was designed on this exact methodology, which is if you book a reservation at a restaurant and take people out,
Yeah.
no one is in service to one another. You are being served. But if you invite people to your home or to your experience where they have to do something to serve each other, it changes the dynamic entirely. So right before the pandemic, not a super spreader event, but I think it was like March 6th, 2020, I hosted a dinner at my house for people and talent leaders in tech, and it included like in-house operators, recruiters, talent partners, you name it, with no agenda other than I just think we can do more together if you cross-pollinate ideas of people working on different things. And for me, it was incredible what came out of that. Very simply, that, my husband and I have hosted these dinners for all sorts of different groups, but that one in particular, the relationships and bonds that are forged when you ask someone to, put a plate of cheese out and crackers, or can you help me bring, like, I've got to get this chicken out of the oven. Can you put it on this platter?
It's just bringing that energy down to the human to human level.
Mask comes off.
Yeah.
I remember that dinner, and to be perfectly honest with you, like, as a high school dropout, that was one of those moments where I was like, I've arrived. Because so I was very grateful for it, because there's a lot of fear when you drop out of high school and da-da-da-da-da. And so it was just one of those moments where I'm being invited to a dinner party of people who call themselves professionals, something that 16-year-old me would not have, that's not happening. I'm just going to be at McDonald's, and maybe I'll be a branch manager one day, or store manager one day.
Right.
But I want to double click on this area, because you're one of the most thoughtful people that I know. And I mean that in the way that it's just always present. And so when you're talking to somebody or you're listening to them, you're truly listening, first off. And then on top of that, so that makes you a great executive recruiter or people
That's
person,
really
regardless.
Kind.
But then you do lead with that value exchange piece, whereas you can tell the difference in terms of okay, well, this is clearly a lopsided value exchange and you might stray from it or whatever. But there's this, I guess what I'm curious about most, and we can go all sorts of different paths, but you have that dinner and some of the community work that you've done just highlights that you have this ton of great knowledge literally around how to gather people. That was a small gathering, and for the sake of this being the Gathering podcast, I'd love
it's the name of the podcast.
How did you get to that? What brought you that information? How did you come about it? What would
You mean the impetus to host dinner parties, or you mean the drive that she has to actually bring people together?
No, there's the skill set behind how you do it, right? I could set up a dinner party and, call it on tomorrow, but if you got invited to Marianne's, it would be very different and better and next level. And it's truly about connecting people. And so I'm curious how you learned to do that, mainly so that people listening can dive into some of your sources of information.
That is a good question. It's my origin story, not actual.
Dun.
Not actually. I didn't come from tech. And for those I speak to, I'm often very transparent about this. Even candidates I meet on a day-to-day basis. I did a master's in human rights. I thought I was going to help save the world, and ended up in tech because I just loved I needed to find the people who were changing the world, but faster. More recklessly and in a really interesting way. And that's how we landed here. But my foundation was I did this master's in human rights and post-conflict recovery. And what I was looking at there was actually not how post-mass atrocity a government prosecutes the criminals responsible for these crimes, the leaders responsible for these crimes, but actually isolating that, looking at all of the people of the country outside of that and understanding how they were recovering. And often these two things are very separate. And we can create a great analogy here that I don't even think I've ever used before, which is the difference between the human side of things and the corporate side of things, which we've, talked about a little bit. There is a huge disconnect with our expectations of what we think is good for people and what actually is good for people. And it was when I spent some time in Cambodia during the extraordinary courts process there. And I went there for my research with the expectation that Cambodia would be very similar to what happened in South Africa and Rwanda, and that they would be running a truth-telling process, because often what we're all seeking at the end of the day, no matter what, is just the truth.
Just the truth. What actually happened?
What I learned and was very humbled by as I show up, computer research papers ready to go. the Cambodian culture is so different from those other cultures. They are very Buddhist culture, and they also have a very, very high standard of, I'm going to butcher this, but like not losing face, basically. If you admit fault, like you can like move yourself down like a peg or two in the eyes of your community. And as a result, there was not a lot of conversation about the conflict that happened with the Khmer Rouge and the genocide. It was a lot of actions speak louder than words. Right. What I'm getting at here is my foundation is in understanding that like every single culture is different, every single person is different, and how we choose to create community often has to do with like what works for those individuals and those people. This is applicable within any company. I think that often people hiring think that they are the engine, the employees are driving the car. Like they are coming in and they are learning how to drive the engine that is the company. Whereas like the right manager will see that any person you're hiring, they are the car. You're learning how to drive them because individually we're also different. Is that like very meta? I'm sorry.
It's a good one. It's a really good metaphor.
But like I guess my attitude is just that there's so much diversity in how we all experience the world that the foundations I built in understanding community came from that human rights background and just the respect for how different we all are, which just humbles me every single day. I walk into any conversation not really knowing the personality of the person I'm going to connect with. And any time across my career that I've been responsible for building community, a lot of it has just been product-led growth.
Wraps it all up nice and tight.
What is happening? I create this thing and how are people responding to it? A great example of that was when I was building Tech TO in the early days with Alex and Jason.
Yeah.
We were hosting these events and they looked like every other event. And then I asked myself, why are people coming here? And the answer is every single person is coming for a different reason. And if we expect that putting founders on stage is enough for people to walk away and say, I got my goal accomplished of meeting a client, meeting an investor, finding a job, or just assuming that by networking they were going to figure that out, that wasn't it was not enough. And that's where I proposed the idea of the community open mic, which has become like a stalwart for that community of what happens if you just hand a microphone to someone for 10 seconds and let them share their truth. So I guess the lesson there is like adapt your own expectations of what community needs to look like based on the audience you're speaking to, and get creative and get humble and make people sit on the floor.
Yeah, I like that one. That's
if you're listening to this and you're like, Marianne, I don't have a dinner table for 10 people. I can't,
use a box.
Like host a picnic, have people over. If you have a 4-person little table in your condo or you don't even have that, just find the space. We're all just seeking connection. We just want to make a sandwich together. We want to make pasta together. We want to have a laugh.
A great venue, by the way, for private dining. We have many rooms you can book on demand. Just go to the website, startwell.co.